Welcome to the NFL MVP Momentum Podcast. I'm Sam Holcroft, joined alongside Payton Thompson. Before we begin, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP, follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast, and check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. So today we're going to talk about our top 10 storylines to follow this season. But before we do that, let's talk about our picks and our standings. So last week I went 9-7, while Payton and Zeke both went 10-6, and Sean went 11-5. With Zeke and Sean both getting their upsets and double downs correct, while I got my upset incorrect, but got the double down, and Payton was the opposite of me. So the standings going into week 2 is Sean with 14 points, Zeke with 13, and Payton and I with 11. We've decided that a double down is worth 2, and an upset is worth 1 extra point. So before we get into our top 10 storylines to watch this season, we're going to start off with some Overreaction Monday, even though it's not Monday at time of recording. This is what we think is an overreaction from this last week, and with just a little bit of kind of explanation after. So, Payton, you can go ahead and start with Sean's Overreaction Monday.
Yeah, we're going to start at the NFC East here with the Giants. The overreaction is the Giants are the bottom dwellers at NFC this year. And, I think to a certain extent, this could be a little bit of a reach. But I think, what Sean is trying to say is that, being that they were in the playoffs last year and being that they, were looking to take another step forward as far as offensively and kind of be the same defensive team that were last year, I think people were expecting them to put up a much better fight against the Cowboys than they did. And obviously, that first game was really rough for them, having I believe it was a shutout and, letting the Cowboys put up 40 on them. And, eventually letting the backup quarterback come in, that's definitely the opposite of what they wanted to do to come out to start with. And so, yeah, it looked really bad. So, I feel like as far as the NFC East goes this year, it's going to be very competitive. And I think the NFC in general is going to be a little bit more competitive than people think. But, being that they still have a lot of good offensive weapons, Daniel Jones, as long as he's healthy, Saquon as well, Brian Dabble being a great head coach, they shouldn't be the bottom dwellers, but, they might be due for some serious regression.
Definitely. So for Zeke's Overreaction Monday, he said Miami and Dallas have been the scariest teams because of their playmakers, and that's because of their offensive and defensive playmakers respectively. Tyreek Hill had one of the best receiving games that we've seen in quite a while against a defense that honestly is really good defense. Mike McDaniel just drew up the right plays to get them going. And then Dallas's defense, I mean, when you have Trayvon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore, Micah Parsons, and DeMarcus Lawrence, like those are 4 scary guys to have on that defense, and they made the Giants look like they were not even a playoff team last year, and they were more in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. So, although that the Giants could be a bottom dweller, you still got to give Dallas props.
Yeah, I would say everything that you said is pretty accurate. And the thing is that I want to add on to that is I think that, less about their weapons, and I think that's kind of where the overreaction comes from. I think it's a little bit less about their weapons and more about the quarterbacks. I think when Tua and Dak are on, they're some of the best, accurate downfield quarterbacks in the league. Sometimes injuries have been an issue. Dak a couple years ago, and obviously Tua with the concussion stuff last year. Not being able to be consistently on the field, I think, hurts them. But when they're on the field, they're scary. Moving on to my overreaction personally, I believe the Bears will be unintentionally in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes. Now, I think that roster-wise, in my personal opinion, I don't see this roster being very much better than the roster they had last year. Sure, Justin Fields, has that, another year of experience under his belt. DJ Moore, Rondell Moore getting another year of experience there. In the defense, being slightly better than last year. It does help, but we have to remember that the Bears won 3 games last year. And obviously they were due for the number 1 pick. They traded it to the Panthers to acquire DJ Moore and more picks. But we can't forget that they were in the Bryce Young sweepstakes last year. And so being that I don't see them being very competitive this year, I just think that although they don't want to be in that, top 2 pick conversation, I just don't see a lot of other teams being as bad as them. And we'll kind of talk about that later on our storylines to watch for Caleb Williams. But, I just don't see a lot of other teams being as bad as them besides maybe one or two teams we can think of.
Yeah, and it's really unfortunate because I'm kind of a big Justin Fields guy, and I really think that if you put the targets around him with a good offensive line, some receivers that can catch the ball and move downfield, that he's going to be a good quarterback. But the thing is, and we talked about this yesterday off air, if the Bears get the number one pick again, they can't trade their number one pick away twice in a row. You just can't. So you'll have to go with Caleb Williams there, and just hope that that would be the answer. So my overreaction is that watch out for Brock Purdy in the MVP race. Now, obviously, it's an overreaction because it's his second year in the league. But let me ask you, PT, what has the MVP been for the last 10 years? It goes to the quarterback on the best team in the
Best
NFL.
team. Yep.
With the exception of being in 2016 with Matt Ryan. They were not the best team, but they were the seventh highest scoring offense at that time
Right.
in NFL
Right.
history. So you
Yeah.
kind of that was how you give it to him. But other than that, Peyton Manning tied for the best record in the league. Aaron Rodgers tied for the best record in the league. Cam Newton had one loss in the regular season. Tom Brady tied for the best record in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes tied for the best record in the NFL. Lamar Jackson tied for the best record in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers tied for the best record in the NFL. Aaron Rodgers, best record in the NFL, and Mahomes tied for the best record in the NFL. If the 49ers are the best team in the NFC, which after week one, I could definitely see, then watch out for Brock Purdy to take that MVP.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said was facts as far as, the criteria that goes into it. I think the only rebuttal I would have to this is I think the AFC would have something to say about it. I think there's going to be one team in the AFC that's going to have a better record. And I've kind of talked about guys like Burrow and Tua before, and I like both those guys, and I even think Trevor Lawrence would have a case if that offense can put out enough points. But I just think that Brock Purdy, he's a little bit limited by his rushing upside. And there's so many weapons around him that it's hard to say that, if you didn't put in another quarterback in there, that they wouldn't do the same, if not better. I think when you kind of listed those other quarterbacks that you mentioned before that won MVP, I think aside from maybe, Matt Ryan, of course, and that was kind of the one exception. I think if you take all those quarterbacks away and you replace them with any other quarterback that year, besides maybe one guy, and that's maybe like Cam Newton or, whoever else, I don't think that the team has, the same amount of wins or success. But I think Brock Purdy, you could definitely say that. I think if C-Mac has the right output, he could be one of those guys. And obviously, it's really hard to win as a running back as well. But, I just think that if, there's one team in the AFC or even the NFC that's, one win less behind them, but you can kind of tell that they mean a little bit more to their team, I think that it would be a little bit more meaningful for them to get it.
Yeah, fair point. So we'll go ahead and kick it to Peyton again for our top 10 storylines to watch this season. We'll start off with number 10.
Yeah, so this is kind of a storyline that I came up with, and it's called the Young QB Bottom Dwellers. And these are kind of just examples. Guys like Pickett, Justin Fields, Baker Mayfield, Zach Wilson, obviously with the Aaron Rodgers injury, Sam Howell, Desmond Ritter. I think you could put a couple more guys in there. Obviously, I was kind of thinking about this the other day, and I'm like, I think the NFL is really ran by young quarterbacks now, and I don't know if that was necessarily a thing, 5-10 years ago when you had guys like Tom, had guys like Payton, Aaron Rodgers, and even Aaron Rodgers a couple years ago, Russell Wilson. Obviously, he was young with the Legion of Boom, but I think it's really young quarterbacks that are taking over, and I kind of thought about it, and I was like, there's a certain amount of quarterbacks in the NFL that really, can only be that, like, basically there has to be that section of quarterbacks, starting quarterbacks in the league that are, ranges 23 to 31 that unfortunately just have to be the bottom barrel guys. And I feel like, having a young stud quarterback maybe isn't as valuable as it used to be. But at the same time, if you have a guy that's, 1 through 5, you talk about a Burrow, talk about a Mahomes, obviously, because he's still young, talk about, Justin Herbert on the right day. And even guys like Justin Herbert, might go up and down the rankings, Josh Allen as well with his really rough game. How much does that make a difference between a guy that's, 13 or 14 because there's so many good young quarterbacks in the league? But then you get to, that lower section that we're talking about here, and it's like, I think certain quarterbacks in certain systems like this, you can kind of work with. And, you could throw Brock Purdy in here as well because he's still a young guy as well. But obviously in the Shanahan system, he's going to have a lot of that good usage, a lot of the plays drawn up for him. But if you talk about a guy like Justin Fields, Baker Mayfield that we've seen, in the past couple of years, Zach Wilson, Sam Howell, that maybe need a little bit more offensive help and they're not really put in that position, how much can you really work with that, And so, especially with Drake May and Caleb Williams coming into this year's draft, I just don't know how far, a bottom dweller QB can take you. But unfortunately, I think a lot of these guys, they're average to good quarterbacks, but I think, there's got to be a bottom tier quarterback list in this league. And, some of these guys went really high. You talk about Pickett, Fields, even Baker. I mean, really, all these guys went really high besides Ritter and Howell. And, it's kind of just interesting to see how the quarterback room is trending in the NFL. And I'm curious to see how these young quarterbacks do in the league.
Yeah. And it's just sometimes you just have to figure out your role, especially with a lot of these guys. Like, I mean, Justin Fields, we've been talking like this could be his last leg. He's been in the league for, I think this is his third year now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Baker's been in the league for quite a while now. So some of these guys could be transitional quarterbacks, whereas some of these guys could be the future centerpiece. Like, I know the Commanders are really high on Sam Howell. It's his first full year of being a starter, so he's probably going to get 1 or 2 years before they would move off of him. Kenny Pickett, it's his second year. He's going to get 2 more years. But yeah, just having to make that step up. Someone who you didn't put in here is Jordan Love. That could be a guy where like could start out as that what we see as a bottom dweller, but could instantly. If you think about it, when Aaron Rodgers first took the job from Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers was a bottom dweller.
Right.
Because like we didn't know what the Packers were going to do that first year, and they ended up still being very good. And then, the rest is history, winning 4 MVPs. So they could take that step up as well. So storyline number 9 to watch for this season is the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, and who are the top 3 teams to watch out for. So I'm not personally going to give a top 3 to watch out for because it could really change. Because realistically, if you would have told me at the preseason or asked me who the top 3 are, I would have been like Cardinals, Rams, and Buccaneers. Well, the Cardinals were competitive, the Rams won, and the Buccaneers won. So right now, I have no idea. And we'll find out because maybe those are the only wins that those teams had. I mean, you got to keep in mind the Bears, who had the number 1 pick last year or before they traded it away, beat the San Francisco 49ers week 1. So crazier things have happened in week 1. But just keeping an eye on who those teams are, and because like we could have a surprise team. We could have the Seahawks only win 3 games this year. They could be in that Caleb Williams sweepstakes, even though they just paid Geno. So just keeping an eye out for those 3 teams and who they are could be really fun to watch.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, a lot's going to change throughout the season, and I think injuries also play a factor, But I think it's going to be more interesting to watch through the last 5 games because I think that's when it gets really close. Obviously, there's going to be tiebreakers to watch out for, but I really like what you added to that. I think for me, I think if I were to put a top 3, because that's kind of what I was aiming to do here, I would have to say the Cardinals because they have their own pick and the Texans pick. So they kind of have a double advantage there because I think one of those picks is going to be bottom 5 and hopefully bottom 3 for them. And, kind of that weird dynamic with Kyler Murray. I'm not really sure what they're going to do with him and having a top pick either because they may not be, totally bought into Murray. And then I think you got to watch out for the Bears, like I said before. I just didn't see a lot of improvement for them, and I feel like they came out really flat this weekend, and especially in that NFC North division, I just I don't really see exactly what they're going to do yet. Um, but as far as the last third team, I'm not really sure exactly who that team would be. I think it's that is going to be the team that's right now maybe looks good or doesn't nobody really knows who it's going to be yet. But I think it's going to be a veteran team that's going to be selling assets. You look at the Buccaneers, you look at what's another team that had maybe like the Rams. Where they could have a couple wins throughout the first couple weeks, but then they just realize that it's probably they're better off just tanking and selling assets now. So moving on to the eighth storyline to watch this season, the offensive rookie showcase. And this is kind of something I had a little bit of stake into because Bijan Robinson having, one of the better odds to win rookie of the year. I'm going to be following that throughout the season. And I have him in a couple fantasy leagues as well because he's my guy and I think he's going to do really well. But, if you kind of have to look at all these rookies and how they did week one. And throughout the season, I think we're going to see peaks and valleys, as we do with any rookie, whether that's offensive, defensive, wide receiver, quarterback, running back. But week one, I thought a lot of these guys looked really good. I thought Anthony Richardson moved really well out through the pocket, outside the pocket. I think he made some good throws. I think he looked very poised. It didn't look like the game was too big for him. He was a quarterback I was kind of watching against the Jaguars, and I thought he played really good against that defense. I don't know if his style of play is going to be very sustainable because like Lamar and Cam Newton and guys like that, it's just very hard to sustain that much rushing upside. But I think if he can become more dialed into mixing up his play style, kind of mixing in more deep throws, being accurate. Obviously, it's going to take some help from Michael Pittman and guys over there on the offensive line and whatnot, but I thought he looked really good. I thought another guy looked really good is Bryce Young. And I think, obviously Bryce Young went up against the Falcons and Jesse Bates kind of had his way with him, 2 interceptions, 1 fumble on Miles Sanders specifically. And he had a great day for the Falcons. But I think the biggest thing for me is Bryce Young passed the eye test. I think he had a couple rough drives. I think he had a couple rough plays, but I think you saw that his processor is very good. He's very good at not forcing things. Obviously, he had those couple plays, but then the next drive down, he came down and he scored a touchdown to Hayden Hurst. And I think honestly, the Panthers' offensive line is underratedly average, not very good. And so for him to be, that shorter quarterback, I think he delivered some really good throws. And I really don't think that the receivers over there are very good either. So I think for the amount of talent he was kind of working with, which is, I think, mainly on the defensive side for them, I think he played really well and he passed the eye test for me. And CJ Stroud, I think, had an okay day, but I think it's really hard for me to evaluate the Texans because just like the Bears, I think they're a team they're not going to be very good again. The offensive line looked really bad. I think some questionable play calling as well kind of got to him a little bit, but I think he'll be fine. Now we could talk about some of the running backs. Let's start with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think Jahmyr Gibbs played very well. I think people weren't expecting as much 50-50 split with him and Montgomery, but I think for the touches that he got, and he's going to continue to increase that volume throughout the season. He looked really good. He did remind me of Kamara, which was kind of my comp having out of college for him. He had good hands. He was very elusive. I believe his PFF score was very good as far as getting through broken tackles and just making the most of his touches that he got. He looked really good. And then you talk about my guy Bijan Robinson had his first career touchdown. He had 6 targets and he completed all 6 receptions. And I think that people are expecting, after this first game, obviously Tyler Algier took the bulk of the run game on the ground and he had those 2 touchdowns. And I think people are thinking that it's going to be a split share running back committee. And I think that's kind of what you think too, Sam. But I honestly can see it shifting more 60-40 as the season goes on. I think Bijan just needs a little bit more time to kind of understand how this offensive line works. Obviously, Algier is the guy that, played all last year with a weaker offensive line. But he still had 1,000 yards. And so he's just going to be, basically it's going to be his bulk carry to lose because he's the guy that has the experience right now. But I think as we figure out how to use Bijan more effectively, and he figures out how to play in the system more effectively, getting more experience, I think he'll be even better, and I think he'll get more touches. And then another guy I wanted to add in there, kind of a touch on the end, is Jordan Addison. I think him stepping in the position to be that wide receiver 2/3. I think he played very well, having his first career touchdown with the Vikings. Obviously, they lost, but he had more touchdowns than Justin Jefferson. So, and I think he played well. I think he ran some crisp routes and he looked good.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what a lot of these rookies can do this year. A lot of them, like, honestly, I don't think any of those guys that you just mentioned had a bad game. Like, I mean,
Right.
Stroud being the question mark, but I mean, it's his first game as a rookie quarterback. So, I mean, a lot of these guys have showed like some good potential, especially like, with Gibbs. Like, I mean, Montgomery's might be their running back one, but they took him. They took Gibbs at number 12, pick number 12. So like, they're gonna have to feed him a lot. I think I'm excited for Jordan Addison. I just feel like a lot of these guys can kind of be shadowed by the guys that are not necessarily better, but have been there in their position a little bit longer. Like Algier could be taking a lot of spotlight from Robinson. Who knows when that passing of the torch could really be? Like it could be next week, or it could be like week 9 when Robinson finally starts getting those more carries than Tyler. Montgomery got a bulk of the carries compared to Gibbs, and of course Jordan Addison has Justin Jefferson on his team, so a lot of those guys could just kind of get overshadowed a little bit, but they're definitely going to be fun to watch. And these quarterbacks, I'm kind of excited to see these quarterbacks in their careers. So the number 7 storyline to watch this year is the NFC South being competitive. Like I think that's something that you and I kind of knew, but
Yeah.
like for people to kind of figure out, because we know that the Saints can be a good team. They just beat the Titans. How good are the Titans really? We'll find out in the coming weeks. Um, but the Falcons played a good game, and not only a good game, but a good game against the Panthers, who also played a good game. It was tied at half. It was 10-10. Bryce Young, like you just said, had a pretty good game with some even though he had some turnovers, he led down next drive and went and got a touchdown. So I think that this Panthers defense could be a reason that they stay in some games. I mean, that's a reason that it wasn't a blowout early. They just fell apart towards the end. But and then Tampa Bay beating Minnesota. Like I know I'm not expecting much from Minnesota this year. I think I have them as a 9-8 team, but you and Zeke have them winning the North again. So, but Tampa Bay just beat them. And again, I still think that a top 10 team on paper, and then that leaves. I guess that was all 4 teams.
Yeah.
So yeah, like this could be a very competitive division, and also just competitive teams. Like if Tampa Bay does have a resurgence, they could maybe be a playoff team again.
Yeah, man. I really have two things to add. I mean, I like everything you said, and obviously I'm a little bit biased because my team's in this division. But two things about this division I think you have to look out for. I think every single defense in this division is at minimum week in week out gonna be competitive. I don't think any of these defenses you can pass all over, you can't run all over. I think the one exception would be the Falcons because we don't really know exactly what they are on defense yet. I think we have some playmakers and some ball hawks, but I have some question marks about that run defense still. But even then, I think the defenses are going to get even better as they keep playing together and building that rapport. The other thing about the NFC South and the Buccaneers specifically is I think Baker Mayfield surprisingly looked pretty good. This weekend. I think a lot of people, including myself, were expecting him to come out very flat. Kind of how he's been the last couple of years, but. Maybe he's finally found a permanent home that he could stay, and at least at minimum be a competent quarterback that they could use and basically be put in this veteran kind of system. And if he could be competent and average, then I can see them being competitive against every single team they play because we know defensively they have it, and they have Todd Bowles, who is a proven winner. So, I think that they can, get it done if he's just average at best. Moving on to number 6 storyline this season to watch out for: the Jets without Rodgers. And this was a big storyline going into the season with, how is Aaron Rodgers going to look with this new team? Because obviously he's played for the Packers his whole career, and I think, unfortunately for a lot of fans, including, Jets fans, obviously, but fans of football, kind of wanted to see what Aaron Rodgers looked like with this new system, and unfortunately, I believe it was the fourth play of the game. I don't even know if I think maybe he threw one time, but the first drive in general, he comes out, has an Achilles injury. I believe we, found out a day or two ago that it is a torn Achilles, so he'll be out for the season most likely. And so, I think the main thing we have to worry about here is, what do the Jets look like without Aaron Rodgers? And obviously, I think, obviously, Aaron Rodgers, we hope he gets healthy. We hope he comes back to play football, but and we're kind of hoping for his health as well. But I think you kind of have to look at it from the perspective from the Jets, where this defense is ready to win, and I think offensively, even without him, they beat the Bills, who I think are still a respectable team, and obviously they made things really hard for that Bills offense and Josh Allen specifically. But that just proves to me that if they can beat a team like the Bills, that they're ready to win right now. And I think it's going to come down to Zach Wilson, man. Unless they can sign another veteran quarterback, which I think they should. I don't know if they will, but I think they should. I would try to make a trade for some kind of mobile quarterback, a Teddy Bridgewater, maybe a Taylor Heineke that can kind of move around. That I think on those specific respective teams, as far as the Lions and Falcons, I don't know if they're necessarily going to get a whole lot of run. You could, make a call about Ryan Tannehill, because I think he would be a good quarterback in the kind of system that the Jets want to run. If he could get the ball downfield, obviously that run game has to be clicking. But if Zach Wilson's their guy, and he could be mature enough to run the offense at least average, maybe as a competent quarterback that could, I'm looking at like maybe like a 2-to-1 touchdown to turnover ratio with maybe 215 yards a game on average. If he could do that and the defense is clicking, if they're a top 3 defense again, I don't see why the Jets can't be a great football team. But I think one thing that you have to think about long term with this is that I don't know necessarily what their upside is now, because you look at kind of what we talked about earlier with all these great quarterbacks. I think in the playoffs specifically, quarterbacks matter, especially in the AFC, where it's kind of, it's a bloodbath as far as quarterbacks go. I think the top 6 or 7 quarterbacks in the league, I think 4 or 5 of them belong in the AFC, and you just need a top quarterback to get it done in the playoffs. So I think that's kind of a worry that you have to have, and I think the Jets should sign somebody else, even if they decide Wilson deserves to start. I think they should have some kind of backup option.
Yeah, I agree. I think that with this, it's like it's a story because we're missing out on something that we really wanted to see, but now we got to feel like they went out there, they got all these assets to go along with Aaron Rodgers. Now, how good are these assets going to do? How is McCole Hardman? How is Alan Lazard and Dalvin Cook all going to do? Because they went out and got those 3 guys to complement Aaron Rodgers. Now they're going to have to rely on those guys because Aaron Rodgers is not there either. So the number 5 storyline to watch this season is In Tua We Trust. Way like right before we did our first podcast, us 4 guys from the podcast got together and we were just talking, and we were talking about our top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL, and I think Sean put Tua as his number 10. 9 and 10, we all kind of had some goofy guys in there, but I remember saying to him, I'm like, In Tua We Trust, and then ever since then he's been saying that. So In Tua We Trust. 450 plus yards against the Chargers defense, which is not a bad defense. I think that was just a rough week, and I think it's more props to the Dolphins than discredit to the Chargers, if that makes sense. I mean, you got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. They lost Mike Gesicki, but They've been throwing to Smythe a lot. They've been throwing Alec Ingold out of the backfield. Like they're getting the ball to a lot of different guys. I remember we were watching the game, PT, and I'm like, I think that's Alec Ingold's third catch. Like
Yeah.
they're spreading the ball around and also going down and winning that game with Jalen Waddle not on the field. Like that was insane. I think the Dolphins have something to prove. Like hey, like if I'm Tua, it's like hey, we lost by one possession to the Bills last year in the playoffs without me. What would have happened if I was there? Might have won. And I think that's what he's trying to show this year. So, yeah, into what we trust, I think so.
Yeah, man, I completely agree with you. I kind of like that we talked about, the overreactions before, and I touched on Zeke's point that you kind of went over as far as Miami and Dallas having the scariest teams because of their playmakers. And I said, well, I think it's a little bit more about the quarterbacks because I think we've all seen that when Tua plays well, the Dolphins usually win. And I think they were on course to be a very good team last year before he got his injuries and they kind of derailed their season. And, it makes their playmakers even more explosive when you got a guy that can launch it downfield like that. And, I've told you, this podcast, I told you the podcast before, before last one or whatever, that I believe in Tua this year. He's in one of my, the categories with Trevor and Burrow where, I think you really have to keep an eye out for an MVP race. Obviously, I still have Burrow in my opinion, but I think you have to watch out for him. I think he looked very good, and I don't expect him to slow down. And like you said, the Chargers aren't a bad defense, so I don't see why you couldn't keep it up against even worse defenses.
Definitely.
Now moving on to our fourth, the Eagles regression. And, I like that I'm able to touch up on this one because this is one of the, and it kind of has to do with our next storyline as well that I'll kind of, you'll see it. But yeah, I just think that obviously I don't think you can judge a team too harshly on one game, but I think they did look very, I don't know if the word is rusty. And I don't know if the Super Bowl hangover is quite as imminent as it would be if they had won the Super Bowl. Because I believe that, I mean, I thought that they were going to come out and be, thirsty for blood. I thought they were going to beat the Patriots by, 21, 24 points. But, they just looked very sloppy. And like I said before in other podcasts, I just think that teams are going to, figure out Jalen Hurts' tendencies a little bit more. Obviously, I think it's really hard to stop their playmakers on the outside, man. I think if we're talking about playmakers and how much they mean to teams, I think the acquisition of AJ Brown for that slightly later first round pick, I think was a great trade for them. I think the Titans probably wouldn't have done it as far as knowing where they are at now, and drafting Devontae Smith as that burner on the outside. I think they're great weapons. They didn't quite utilize DeAndre Swift how I thought they were going to. Maybe that changes over the course of the season, but Kenneth Gainwell being their main running back, it was a little bit sloppy, but that's what they want to go with. So I still believe the Eagles are going to be very good, but I don't know if they're going to. I don't have them winning the division. I'll just say that. Uh, but yeah, I do think they're due for some regression. And obviously, regression for them would be not making the Super Bowl by definition. But I have more regression as I don't have them as a top four seed in the playoffs because they're not going to win the division. I think they win the first round, and I think they lose in the divisional.
Dang. So with the Eagles regression, like, and it's a lot to say after one game, but like it is valid because at some point in the season, if they do have a losing season or do like make the playoffs as like a 6 or 7 seed, what is the game that you go back and be like, this is where we first saw it, and you could go to this game against the
Right.
Patriots. They were up 16-0. They had a pick six, and then they only scored 9 points after that. Now I understand that there was a really bad rainstorm that affected not only this game but multiple games in the NFL this last weekend, with the Bengals game being one of them too. Bengals only being able to score 3 points, but this this team should not be escaping a team like the Patriots, who could have also been in that Caleb Williams sweepstakes too. So the fact that they were able to escape and the Patriots had an opportunity to win in that last minute too, like it's a little bit of a red flag. I'm surprised that wasn't your overreaction Monday, but I mean, like this says, you're all in on the Cowboys passing the Eagles this year. So as Dallas, we finally them boys, and I say finally because I don't buy into the fact that it's always we them boys. It's we finally them boys. You know, we kind of talked earlier with Zeke's overreaction about them being scary because of their playmakers. Because when Dak's on, he's on. They got that scary defense. Like I said, Trayvon Diggs, Stephon Gilmore, Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence. They got playmakers all around. They got CeeDee Lamb on offense. Tony Pollard looks like he's going to be their guy this season, which is why they let Zeke go. Like the Cowboys have a lot going for them right now. And the fact that, you know, the team that went to the Super Bowl last year is in their division, we're going to see a dogfight. And that's why we have these two storylines just right next to each other.
Yeah, man. I think defensively, when you look at their roster, they added Stephon Gilmore. I think Micah Parsons having another year under his belt, having a little bit more experience, and really everybody on that defense, because I think most of their guys are pretty young still. And Dan Quinn, having another year under his belt as the DC, I think, is really big for them. And kind of on a side note, as much as, as much as as much pain as I went through as having Dan Quinn as my head coach for those 4 or 5 years, I think he may have finally proven to me, and obviously it's his one game, but I think he finally have proven to me that he deserves another shot at the head coach position. I think obviously he was fielding interviews last year, decided to return at DC, and he's such a smart DC, man. How he sets guys up in position to have breakout years. Micah Parsons being a top three guy, in his, I believe, second year or first or second. Anyways, he's a super young guy. Obviously, Trayvon Diggs having a career high and league high in interceptions. Leighton Vander Esch having a great couple years, and I think he's going to return to where he should be at. The defense is going to be awesome again, and offensively, I think it's hard for me to say that they've gotten better. Obviously, losing Zeke and Dalton Schultz, but I love the addition of Brandon Cooks, man. I think he is probably one of the more underrated receivers. He's 1,000 yards every year, every single team he's on, even if it's a team that isn't going to pass super far downfield. You talk about the Saints with Jameis Winston. You talk about the Texans with their cycling quarterbacks they've had the past couple years. He always has 1,000 yards. He's always a deep threat. And I think he's going to be a bigger part of that offense than people think. And I think CeeDee Lamb is also due for his best year of his career. So, yeah, man, I just think that the Cowboys are primed for it. And we saw against the Giants that, obviously it was a little bit more defensively impacted. But I think we're going to see some games where Dak has, 4 touchdowns, maybe a turnover, but he's going to have, 350 yards because they're going to have three guys that can get downfield. Michael Gallup is healthy. And they're going to have who's the young tight end that they drafted?
I
I don't
don't.
know. I'm not sure, but they do
Yeah,
have a tight end replacement who is only going to get better, and they got Mozzie Smith in the first round last year at defensive tackle, I believe. So their roster is primed to win.
yeah, definitely.
But now moving on to our second storyline here, we have the NFC North race, and I think this is the storyline that might make me eat my words a little bit because the Vikings really did not show me a whole lot this last Saturday. Obviously Justin Jefferson did his thing. Didn't have any touchdowns. He had the yards though. But it's just always been a Kirk Cousins upside thing with me, and I just don't know if he has enough upside to elevate the Vikings to some of those double digit wins. I think a lot of the time last year, obviously they were, what was it, 10-0 or 11-0 in those one score games, and that's just not realistically going to happen, And if you flip that, they're a much worse team last year, even if they put up the stats that maybe they deserve to win games. And so, I think very quickly the Vikings, their whole team construct and chemistry and what happened last year can flip upside down because I don't think they have the defensive pressure to hold up the offense if they're not firing on all cylinders. And then look at some of the other teams. I think the Detroit Lions are also primed to take another step forward. I think for me, and we predicted this as well. We both have them making the playoffs this year. I think they looked good against the Chiefs, although it was a banged up Chiefs team. I think they looked really good. I think the defense is going to continue to get better. And I think Jameer Gibbs with David Montgomery and Jared Goff, having even more confidence and working with Dan Campbell for the second year, I think really I think they have a great shot at making the playoffs, man. Even if it is as a wild card, but who knows? They could win the division and they could get that 3 or 4 seed. Then you talk about some of the other teams. You talk about the Packers and the Bears. I don't really think the Bears are so much to look out for, but I think the Packers could sneakily also be very good if Jordan Love can prove that mentorship from Aaron Rodgers is really paying dividends, and the running backs can stay healthy, and obviously the defense is going to be great. Then I think that's another team that you kind of have to watch out for throughout the season because they're going to be competitive, game in, game out.
Yeah, the NFC North race is probably going to be one of my favorite ones to watch, especially now that we know that the Packers are still going to be pretty relevant, depending on how good the Bears actually are. Um, yeah, Jordan Love looked pretty good. I feel like that the mentorship with Rodgers is definitely going to play into effect here. Um, but I still think that the Vikings and Lions are going to be ahead of them until the Vikings play one of them and beats them. I still going to have those two ahead. But the Vikings, what the heck, man? Like Kirk Cousins threw for 320 yards in the first half, and then only threw for like 23 in the second. Like how does that even happen? So most of the time when you hear that, it's the other way around. Threw for 23 in the first half and 320 in the second. Like you have Justin Jefferson, your rookie Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson. You're telling me that you couldn't get more than 23 yards in the second half when it was still competitive. Now, if he only threw for 23 yards because they were up 30 points, I completely understand that. But it was tighter. They were losing for like most of that. So I don't understand. And then the Lions, they did have a good win against the Chiefs. I do feel like that at sometimes they did play a little sloppy. Um, but in the end, they came out with the win. Great coaching, some really clutch plays by a lot of their guys. I feel like that the Lions, this is their division to win. But the Vikings and the Packers are not going to make it easy. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. And before we move on quickly, I do want to say watch out for a quarterback trade to the Vikings. I think they're one of those teams that might be in that week 7, week 8 kind of bind where they're potentially still have a positive record, but they realize that Kirk Cousins just doesn't have the upside. Um, I would, as crazy as it might sound, man, I would say watch out for a Malik Willis trade. I think they're going to want to aim for a guy that they could get for their, maybe a quarter on the dollar, and they could try to get for potentially 5th or 6th rounder because the Titans are loaded with quarterbacks right now with Will Levis probably at the 2, and then Tannehill still being the starter. I think they're going to want a guy that has more rushing upside, and if they want to take a chance on one of these young quarterbacks, because there's so many of them, that I think they potentially could roll the dice. Because if it ends up not working out, then fine. It was a cheap cost, and you still have a project guy that you can potentially bring to camp next year to battle. But if it does work out, you got a young, potentially young stud quarterback, or even let's just say he's average. He offers the same amount of upside, but maybe a slightly lower floor than Kirk Cousins. Then you still have the same record at the end of the year, and it didn't really cost you much.
Yeah. We'll definitely see with that.
Yeah.
And then with our top storyline to watch this season is who will be the top team in the AFC. So let me run down the list real fast, and I want you to tell me if they won or lost. So the number 1 seed last year, Kansas City Chiefs. Did they win?
They lost.
They lost. Okay. Number 2 seed was the Buffalo Bills.
They lost.
Huh. Okay. Well, surely the Bengals won, right?
Yeah, you can just keep going down, man. they,
Yeah,
they pretty much
yeah.
all took L's, right?
Um,
You could throw the Chargers in there, you know.
Chargers took a loss. The
Yeah,
Ravens won. The
yeah.
Jaguars won, and the Dolphins won. The
Mm.
only team that lost to a playoff team last year was the Chargers, who lost to the Dolphins. That's
Yeah,
realistically the only team that had an excuse. Everyone else that lost, those four or the three other ones, the top three seeds all lost to non-playoff teams last year. Now, of course, the Jets and Lions were like, half a game away from potentially making it, but uh, yeah, I just don't think that this you can't just pick whoever's going to be the top in the AFC. You, me, and Zeke, I think all had different number one seeds in the AFC this year. So who's it going to be? Right now, we don't know because those top three teams, although we're expecting those three teams to be competitive, we could definitely see someone take the reins. I could see the Jaguars being the number one seed in the AFC because of their schedule. Because if the Titans are not that good, they also play the NFC South. They will play division winners, but I mean they're getting the Chiefs right now with Chris Jones, who could potentially not necessarily be ready. Banged up Travis Kelsey. Like this is a game that the Jaguars could win, be 2-0. They don't have to worry about the Chiefs the rest of the year. They'll have to play the Bengals and the Bills. If they get them at the right time, who knows? The Jaguars could be the top team in the AFC. Or it could be the Dolphins, who you predicted, who was probably the best looking offense that we saw this weekend.
yeah. I like everything you added to that. I I don't think I want to add too much more to the substance, but I want to do more of a prediction, and I might be kind of crazy for this because so much can change, and like I said, not too long ago that it's hard to judge based off of one game. But here's my prediction, and this goes as far as the top team to be in the AFC at the end of the regular season, not who I think is going to go all the way or as far as playoffs go, but who do I think has a chance to be the best team in the AFC? One, just based on I think historical odds because I just don't see it happening again and again. I just don't think it's their year, especially with what's been going on earlier in the season with injuries and lack of depth. I don't think it's going to be the Chiefs. I don't think the Chiefs are going to be the one seed this year. I think they could still be a two or three, and they probably will be, but I don't think that they're going to have the offensive consistency through the year. And honestly, I don't really think they're worried about that either. I think they understand that no matter what seed they get, they're going to be able to probably, have a shot to win the whole thing. So I don't think it's going to be the Chiefs. I don't think it's going to be the Bills either because I think offensively, Josh Allen and that offense just have some things to work out. I like James Cook, and that defense should be pretty good. But I got to see more of the offensive consistency with them, and Josh Allen needs to get those turnovers down. And I just think he has some IQ issues he has to iron out. Now, who do I think has a realistic shot at being the one or two? I think it's going to come down to the Bengals or Dolphins. I think they're one of those young teams that have a good enough defense to support their offensive woes, but I think they're good enough offenses where the offense, some games, will carry the defense and they'll be able to put up 28 to 35. I think they both have great young quarterbacks that could be primed for an MVP year. I think they both have two potential wide receiver one alphas. And I think both of them have, substantial coaching staffs that have proven that they can win ball games. And I think that's the recipe for being a one seed. Now, as far as playoff success, that's another discussion. But talking about who's the team to beat in the top AFC, and I think it's those two teams.
Yeah, my only thing with the Bengals, and like last year showed that they could have easily been the two seed last year if they would have potentially played that Bills game. But they had a rough first game of the season last year too with the Steelers, and they ended up
Right.
only losing 3 games after that. They were 4-4 after their first 8 games, and then they won every game
Right.
since then, until the playoffs. So that's definitely a team that could do it. Dolphins, their thing last year was if Tua was healthy, what could we have done? What was our ceiling? And if he stays healthy this year, we could definitely see that. So I could see that, but right now, I still think you can't rule out the Jags. The schedule helps, and I think that they can. Giving up 21 points to the Colts is pretty rough, but I think that they can tune it up this week with the Chiefs, and that could put the AFC on notice if they beat the Chiefs.
Yeah, you're a big Jaguars guy too, and I respect that. You know, you've definitely held that the whole way. And you know, one thing about that Colts defense is, or Colts offense, with the Jaguars playing the defense, I think it's really hard to play an offense like that first game because you don't really have a lot of scouting tape on their running back group. You don't have a lot of tape on Anthony Richardson. Obviously, you know Michael Pittman and you know kind of what they're trying to do on offense, but there was a lot of times where I didn't know what the Colts were trying to do because you have so many moving pieces and new pieces that you know you don't have Jonathan Taylor back there. You know you have a brand new quarterback in his first game of the NFL. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't really blame them for that. And I think they kind of clamped up a little bit more in the second half as well. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think the Jaguars have a chance as well.
So then that leads us to our picks for the week. So we'll start with our upsets, double downs, and then we'll go through the ones that aren't those. So Sean's first, so we'll go with his. His upset of the week is the Broncos over the Commanders. And I believe that all of us, except for Zeke, has that as well. So Zeke, in the middle of that standings, but still has quite a few points on us. Definitely. The Commanders didn't impress me last week. I think the Broncos could have easily won against the Raiders, but I think Sean Payton getting back into the coaching might have just been just a little rusty, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. The Commanders didn't really show me anything offensively that wowed me at all. I think Sam Howell has a long way to go as a project quarterback, and obviously they have confidence in him, but you know, I just don't see him challenging the Broncos defense much.
Yeah. And then Zeke's upset of the week is the Bears over the Buccaneers, and I believe he is the only one that thinks that. Um, I think the Buccaneers kind of showed me that like they can still be a good team. That defense is going to be good, and I don't think that Justin Fields has the talent around him to pick up the win here.
Yeah, me neither, man. And, you know, kind of on the flip side, I mean, I agree with what you said as far as the Buccaneers defense and the Bears offense. But on the flip side of that, I just don't really see. I mean, you know, Baker's a Baker. I think you don't really know what you're getting. But if there's any defense that Baker Mayfield can have success against, I think it's the Bears defense. You know, there's a lot better defenses that he could be playing against, and I just don't see the Bears having a good defense this year.
Yeah. So PT, what's your upset of the week?
Yeah, I wanted to choose one that I kind of was on my own with, and it was over the Panthers over the Saints. You know, I think Bryce Young is going to learn a lot from that first game of his, and you know, I think being another divisional game, I think it's going to be another close one. And you know, obviously the Saints had a close game last week as well, but I think the Panthers are going to want to bring a win really badly because I don't think they want to start off, you know, 0-2 in the division, 0-2 overall record. And I don't know, something just about Frank Reich and that staff and Bryce Young. I just think there's a really good connection there. And I want to see a little bit more of the Saints' offensive consistency because I think when they were clicking, they were very good. But it was hard to say how much of that was just them getting so many opportunities from Tannehill's 3 interceptions.
Yeah. I just think that the Saints, they looked good. Derek Carr had over 300 yards, including the ballsy third and short play that they did with running a streak. So I think that Derek Carr is going to be doing his thing. You know, I'm a big Derek Carr believer still, but you're just preying on the Saints' downfall, aren't you?
I mean, yeah, it's to me, as far as divisionally go, I hate the Saints more than I hate the other teams. I wish on the Saints' downfall every week.
uh, and you were the only one that picked the Panthers there. Zeke
Yep.
and Sean and I picked the Saints. My upset of the week is the Seahawks over the Lions. So I'm not the only one that thinks this. Zeke and I agree on this. So I really feel like the Seahawks just had a really rough game against the Rams. I think that they needed to figure a lot of stuff out, and I think that they will figure it out against this Lions team. I feel like the Lions might be riding a little high after beating the defending champs. So it's going to be a Lions home game, so the fans are going to be electric. I just feel like that this is a recipe for a trap game for the Lions. Um, I still think the Seahawks are probably a better team, like on paper. But we'll see if Dan Campbell's coaching can get them another win. So it looks like Zeke and I have the Seahawks, while you and Sean have the Lions on this one.
Yeah, for me, this was one of those games that was kind of hard to pick because I feel like both rosters are pretty equivalent. Like you said, I think the Seahawks would probably have the edge. But I just feel like Dan Campbell is going to have these guys ready at home. Like you said before, the crowd is going to be electric. And that's why I gave them the slight nod. I think them going to Arrowhead, game one, they're going to be running that confidence. And I think Dan Campbell is going to say, hey, guys, let's go 2-0. Let's start off, really strong. And it gives us the best chance to make the playoffs later off in the season. And they could take the NFC North by storm, but they got to stay consistent. And I think Dan Campbell is going to be one of those guys that's going to keep them focused. And so I have them taking the W.
Yep. So now moving on to our double downs, which is our guarantees. Sean is guaranteeing the Dolphins over the Patriots, and apparently I do not know how to spell. And we all agree with that one. The Dolphins looked like the best offense in the league last year. Last week. The Patriots, they were in because the Eagles let them be. Speaking of the Eagles, that's Zeke's double down for 2 consecutive weeks. Now, if this is another close game, he might want to reconsider having them be his double down. But the Eagles over the Vikings, which is the Thursday night game, we all agree with that one as well. I just feel like, they played week 2 last year too, and it was a blowout. I was expecting the Vikings to put on a little bit of a fight, but yeah, it was not looking good for the Vikings during that game.
Yeah, man. One, I'll start with Sean's double down. I think Dolphins over Patriots is a good call. I think that offense is going to have even more success on that Patriots defense. I can see a couple drives of them getting kind of some fits, but I think they're going to take a lot away from that game tape of the Eagles and Patriots and try to avoid some of the same mistakes. Try to avoid that kind of like trap mindset where you think you got it in the first half and you slow down and you give them a chance. You can't give Bill Belichick a chance. So I think they're going to understand that. And then as far as Eagles over Vikings, I can't really fault Zeke for taking his team because they are, Super Bowl caliber kind of team. But I think it's one of those games that's going to be close. But yeah, we still have the Eagles because they're a superior team in pretty much every way. But I do think the Vikings have a chance to make it really close and possibly have another one of those, one score wins.
Yeah. So who's your double down?
So my double down this week is going to be the Chargers over the Titans. I think the Titans just looked so terrible last week, and I'm not really convinced that defense is very good either. I struggle to find upside outside of basically at every position outside of running back with them. Obviously, Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry, but I think the Chargers losing that tight game against the Dolphins last week. I don't think they want to start 0-2 in the AFC, but I think they're also a far superior team in every single way. I do like Mike Vrabel as the coach, but I think when you look at these two teams, one is just far superior in the air and at the quarterback position, and one is going to have to, if they want to win the game, slowly, what do you call it, cut away at it and use Derrick Henry as they can. But he's really just not at that age where he can just be game breaking and take over the game, opposed to Justin Herbert and the offensive weapons they have on the outside. And so it's hard for me to envision the Titans having a chance in this one.
Yeah, and I think that we all agree with that. I mean, the Titans losing a close game last week, but having to kick 5 field goals and not being able to punch it into the end zone when you have Derrick Henry, when you have D Hop, who could both be red zone threats, but still having to take 5 field goals, just it wasn't a good look.
All right.
And my double down for the week is the 49ers over the Rams. I believe that Brock Purdy is definitely going to be an MVP candidate, and I do think that the Rams might have just gotten lucky on one week with the Seahawks just taking a misstep. Christian McCaffrey showed last week that he could be up for Offensive Player of the Year. So I think it's going to be business as usual for the 49ers.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, I don't necessarily want to take anything away from the Rams' success in that first week because I do think that they earned that W, and I think Matt Stafford had a great game with not many very many receiving weapons. But other than kind of a couple flashes we saw in that game with the Rams being good, I just don't, like you said before, against the 49ers, it's just no real way I can legitimately put the Rams over the 49ers talent wise on either sides of the ball. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yep. So that's our upsets and double downs. We'll go through the 8 other games that were not a part of those. So starting with the Packers Falcons, we all have the Packers here. Last week I probably would have put the Falcons here, but just seeing how Jordan Love and company were able to move the ball down, this will probably be a tough game for the Falcons. But if they could have as many turnovers as they did, I think the Packers could easily have the dub here.
Yeah, man, it's tough for me to put the Packers above my Falcons, but just realistically, I'm going with the team that can just do a little bit more on offense, and not only do a little bit more on offense, but they just have a little bit more defensive cohesion. They have a lot of returning guys. Uh, I think Jair Alexander is slightly better than AJ Terrell. I think we might have a slightly better overall secondary, but when you talk about that defensive front. Packers defensive front is going to give our offensive line some troubles. And then when you talk about the offensive dynamics of it, I'm really concerned about our offensive pass calling. I don't want to say play calling because I think our run game will do their job, but I believe in Desmond Ritter to be able to deliver some throws, but as far as Arthur Smith's ability to be able to put guys like Kyle Pitts and Drake Leonard in a position to be successful, it's just kind of hard for me to see that. And so, with Christian Watson possibly coming back, Jordan Love delivering 3 touchdowns last week, I just think it's going to be really hard for us to cancel that out, especially if Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are healthy.
Yep. So what I think is funny is, and I'm not calling Sean and Zeke delusional, but they both had their respective teams as their double down this week. You went against your Falcons here, and the funny thing is I'm going against my Raiders here. We all picked the Bills here too. So I'm not saying that we're more realistic than them, but I guess if the shoe fits. As much as I wanted to go with the Raiders here, and I do think that the Raiders could actually be sneaky good this year. Um, I don't think Josh Allen is going to be due for 2 bad games in a row, especially where you could point the finger and say like he's the reason we lost. Um, so I think that the Bills are gonna be just fine this upcoming week.
Yeah, me too, man. I think being back at home, it's a classic bounce back game. I think the Raiders will make it closer than some people think, but I think it's going to be more of a little bit higher scoring game. It's going to come down to a couple of those little details that Josh Allen will be able to improve on. And so yeah, I just see it as a classic bounce back game, and as we all do.
So then with the Ravens Bengals, someone disagrees here. And it's the man that has disagreed the most, and that is Zeke. We all have the Bengals. He has the Ravens, which makes sense. He's a Lamar Jackson guy. But I think we all have the Bengals being one of those top teams in the AFC, kind of like we stated earlier. So as long as it's not downpouring like it was last week, I think the Bengals will be fine.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think it would be kind of just like the Bills and Josh Allen. It'd be very odd to see Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense have 2 games in a row where they don't put up much points. And 3 points is not many points at all for the Bengals. And so, I'm kind of looking at this game as a potential blowout game. To be honest with you, I think the Ravens defense is good, but I think the Bengals offense is even better. And I think the Bengals offense is going to want to make a statement against this conference conference rival, I should say.
Yeah. And then another game where two of us disagree. Uh, Sean and I have the Jaguars beating the Chiefs, where you and Zeke have the Chiefs beating the Jaguars. This was another one that I was kind of contemplating as my upset of the week, but I just think the Seahawks are a little bit more primed for it. Where the Jaguars, it's like it just sounds like a perfect trap game for the Chiefs. You just got Chris Jones back. Is he going to be in shape or not? I mean, you don't necessarily have to be 100% in shape to play D tackle. But is he going to be missing a step? Is he going to be a little bit rusty? The Super Bowl hangover could definitely be in effect for him. And also, Travis Kelce's going to be banged up. That's why we picked the Jaguars.
Yeah, to be honest with you, this is probably the hardest game that I had to decide this week because I think there's, past the success for both teams, but I think for me, it's just hard for me to bet that the Chiefs start the season 0-2. Uh, and, I believe they are at home. Yeah, they're away.
They're away.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like it could go either way, but my prediction for this game is it's going to be decently high scoring, but I think that the Chiefs win via field goal. I think they have that last possession. Mahomes makes a couple great throws. Pacheco gets them in slightly better position to make that field goal, and Buck Curtis delivers the game winning field goal. That's how I see this one going, but I could see it going both ways. I really could.
Yeah. Hopefully, Tony doesn't drop the ball on that one.
Yeah, and it's hard to it's really hard to envision that their offensive weapons struggle as much as they did, and having Chris Jones is going to be an addition.
Yep. So the next game that we all agreed on is the Colts Texans. We all put the Colts there. I mean, it's battle of the second and third quarterbacks drafted. It's a divisional game, but I just think that the Colts showed a lot more promise than the Texans did last week. So
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about this game. I believe the Texans overall are a very bad football team, but I think it might depend on Anthony Richardson's health. I think if because right now he has a bone bruise, right? And so I think if he ends up sitting this game because of protection purposes, then I think this game can go the opposite way. Because his rushing upside adds so much extra, dynamo to that offense that I think is very unmatched. You only see 4 or 5 other quarterbacks in the league that can really do that with his size and arm power. But with that being said, if Anthony Richardson plays, which I think he probably will, then I have them winning this game because they just have a much more balanced team, especially defensively.
yeah. Then the next is Giants and Cardinals. We all have excuse me. We all have the Giants here, even though they did get shut out last week, and the Cardinals putting on a little bit of a show with the Commanders. But I just think that after a shutout, excuse me, you can definitely have a great bounce back game. It happens quite often in the NFL when you get shut out that you come out and you have a better game plan and you attack their team's weaknesses. And I feel like the Cardinals could have a huge weakness on their defense.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on to this one. I just want to say, from both teams' perspective, that the Cardinals are a really bad football team. They're going to be tanking, and I think the Giants are going to be pissed. That's really all I have to say about it. I think this is a classic blowout game.
Yeah. All right. And then our second to last one is the Cowboys and the Jets. You, me, and Sean all have the Cowboys, and Zeke's going with the Jets. He was deciding between this game, and he said, you know what? I hate the Cowboys. Go Jets.
Yeah.
So that's really how that went.
Yeah, man, it's just with these two teams, I feel like, the Jets could come out with a win, but if we're just talking strictly about, who has the edge, you got the more veteran quarterback with being at home, coming off a huge win against a divisional rival. I just think they're primed to go 2-0. I think this is going to be the game for Zach Wilson where he's going to get a couple licks in. He's going to get hit a couple times. He's going to get picked off probably a couple times. There's going to be a fumble at some point, whether it's him or whether it's one of the receivers or running back. He's going to have to stay mature. He's going to have to stay focused and not let it get too out of control. Even if it is a loss, that's okay. They beat the Bills last week. They're not going to win every single game, but they need to keep his head on straight and keep him healthy, really, because if he's not healthy, I don't know what their third option is. They're going to have to set another guy next week. But as long as you can keep him clean and he can stay focused and kind of block out all the noise, I think they'll be fine. But I still think they're going to lose.
Yep. Especially with how that Cowboys defense played.
Yeah.
Might be rough. And then the last one, the second Monday Night Football game is, whoops. Oh, I didn't know that you did that. Well, let me change that. So Zeke, Sean, and I all have the Browns, and you're going with the Steelers here.
Yeah.
Please tell me.
I think that Kenny Pickett had a really rough first game, and although I'm not the biggest Pickett fan, it's same thing with Najee Harris, man. He had a really rough first game. But I think Mike Tomlin is the type of coach where he's good at making week to week adjustments. I think the first week, I think that loss to the 49ers being a big blowout, I think could get a little bit blown out of proportion. I think the 49ers came in thinking they were the best team in the NFL, having all those offensive weapons, and obviously Brendan Ayuk having one of his career days. I think it could get blown out of proportion a little bit how bad that loss was. And I'm just not completely sold on the Browns offense, especially when Deshaun Watson hasn't really returned to the old Deshaun Watson yet. You still have Nick Chubb doing his thing, but they don't really have an RB2 that you can go back and forth with. They have 17 new players on their defense. That's a stat that I figured out last week. Falcons being number 2. And so, yeah, man, I just think Mike Tomlin is going to be able to stake this one out.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Deshaun Watson had a good game. Nick Chubb ran for over 100 yards. I just watching the Steelers team, man. It's just I don't see them making the jump that a lot of people were seeing this year. I was expecting them to make the jump. Right now, it's not looking like it. But I mean, you gotta grow incrementally. You can't just one day wake up and be like, you know what, I want to be a playoff team. No, you have to work towards it. And I just don't see the Steelers doing that right now. But this could be a game where you gotta find the small wins, even if they don't win this game. Find the small wins. What did we do well? Well, Kenny didn't turn the ball over. Najee Harris had 75 yards. You got to find those wins and build on it this season. I just don't think that winning this game is going to be part of that.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
So that wraps up our podcast today. We did our overreaction Mondays. We did the top 10 storylines to watch this season, and we did our upsets, double downs, and picks. So is there anything else you need to add on to, PT?
Nope.
All right. Well, once again, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Momentum MVP. Follow our Facebook page at MVP Momentum Podcast. And check us out on YouTube at MVP Momentum Podcast. I've been Sam Holcroft.
I'm Payton Thompson.
Thanks for listening.